People need to, instead of think of sparks, just think instead of signals. I don't deny chemistry, but you gotta look for in terms of what signal is really being sent. How someone is close to you. Do they hold their hands? Do they respond to touch? When you say something, that you can watch their face respond and see if it sort of lights up, rather than just the flush of hormones we all get. Am I getting the right signals? Am I sending the right signals? And then see if it can actually lead to a second or third date that feels like it's something that can be built upon.
Hello, welcome back to Dating Rehab with Anna Morgenstern. Today we have Bob Bates. He has done a lot of different things. He's an author, consultant, technologist, and even a farmer, which he was showing me the painting behind him that you can see. And he's going to tell us about his own personal journey of coming from dysfunctional relationships to finally being in a healthy one. And also about the book that he wrote, which is, he was just talking to me about emotional economics. So I'm really interested to hear more about that. So thank you, Bob, for coming on.
No, it's wonderful being here. I really appreciate you having me on.
Of course, yeah. Tell us more about you, what you do, and about your book.
Well, I come from a long line of dysfunctional relationships in terms of my whole family. I would say that neither side of my family had any idea of what good looked like. So what eventually led to my first marriage, I knew what good wasn't. So I kind of jumped into that. I went through the process of being married for more than 8 years and then spent a number of years dating, which I learned a whole lot about how people connect with one another. And also what I found was useful for me to then find my current match and wife of many years, and also co-farmer. This picture, my wife of today. So I've been married for, we're up on 18 years now. So,
Wow.
so there's a lot going on there. The book that I wrote was on emotional economics. It's called Why You Can't Stop Caring. It's basically, I had this epiphany when I was sitting in this one healthcare meeting one day, and we're discussing mental health and connection. And I started to realize that we talk about these things in terms of value and signal and connection people want. And there's something that needs to be said about this. And that's what the book really contains. So it uses a financial metaphor, but go back to more what economics means, which is really scarcity, love, caring, and a place of being social between multiple people. And that's really what I try to touch on in the book.
I love using metaphors when it comes to dating. Like I talk a lot about how dating is like job searching, but also when it comes to economics, like supply and demand. I talk a lot about how in New York, women really feel it here because there's less demand for us because there's too much supply. But in San Francisco, it's the opposite. And the dating culture is completely different. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean actually emotional economics and like more of the concepts.
Another in a more meaningful way. So we have to respond to signals, and we have to have trades. Some of the trades are short term, the signals that we're operating on, which by the way is like initial chemistry and that date and that sort of thing at first when people go on. But we have to think about then, how do you have something that, for lack of a better description, has compound interest? How do you start to build trust, which I affectionately call trust paychecks? But in other words, it's as you connect with someone, how do you feel like you're paying into them and they're paying into you? And so you have a longer term connection over time. And then honestly, oddly, things like emotional square footage. So how do you have space in your life for different people? How do you set up different rooms for yourself? How do you set up for rooms as you as a couple? And then how should that evolve over time? Remodeling is definitely an important thing. And there's all sorts of other concepts in there, but that's where I thought there was a better way of describing how people can meet, become a version of themselves together, and then keep evolving over time. In fact, I thought there was this Esther Perel, I think I saw a quote on her a few weeks ago when I was reading, was that most people will have 2 or 3 marriages over their lifetime, but often it's to the same person. So I think your current version of yourself, and as a couple, can also become the future versions of yourself, but you have to, again, figure out what that portfolio looks like.
Totally. I have so many people that I've spoken to that have been married for 20, 30 years have all said that they have fallen in and out of love with their spouses many times over the years. Some years are much better. Some years are much harder. But it's the commitment to stay committed is what keeps people together. It's not the lack of love. It's just the, idea of we're committed to this and we're going to, make it work.
Exactly.
So how did you learn how to build connection in dating? Like, how did you come across the tools that you used to find your new wife? Or I guess not new anymore, but your second wife.
Second wife. It's interesting. When I first started, when I was getting divorced, you go through this aspect of loss. So you break all these habits that you had and all these sort of individual sort of trades that you have someone with. In other words, is I do this for you, you do this for me. It's very called microeconomic. But then
Mm.
when I started out date, I had to understand, okay, so what is the initial, hey, this is new, this is exciting, and then how to move past that. And I made a lot of mistakes in dating. There's all sorts of what people would expect is there's that chemistry, that fire. This is, someone who does something that I have no exposure to. They have a different lifestyle. They come from a different background. They don't even come from this country in some cases. To send understanding what were the signals over time that I got on the second, third dates to understand, wow, this is someone who is showing me aspects of transparency and trust. And I was able to share that back with them and it wasn't scaring them
Mm.
away. So that it sounds overly simple, but so much of dating is usually performative. I'm trying to
Mhm.
be attractive. I'm trying to be chosen in some way, shape, or form. So I'm not my usual self. So I think on one date, I have this thing for wearing these t-shirts who are like protest t-shirts, which is kind of odd, like public lands now or something like that. So I tried it for a while on a couple of women I was dating, and I would wear one of my protest t-shirts on the second date and then see how they would respond. Because I was sort of like politically poking the bear. It's not the best way to do it. But I went through this way of saying, okay, how do I get an honest response from people and how do I communicate honest parts of myself? And I think
Mm.
that's one of the things, again, sort of address on it. And my own theory is that you have to figure out how to keep the chemistry alive, keep dating forever, even if it's your spouse, but then have something that a foundation gets start to build on. And you got to start somewhere. So it could be on shared values, it could be on being a foodie, it could be your passion for wine, your love of a certain city. It could be a lot of different things. Like for instance, one of my best friends. So she and her husband are both Israeli, but they live in Brooklyn, and that culture is one of the anchors. But what they build a lot of their relationship on is they're both creatives. So she is into jewelry, like manufacturing, producing artistic jewelry. He's a musician. That creative aspects, while they're very different, is one of the core foundation things which their entire relationship is built on. So it's looking
Mhm.
for those types of things. And apparently in hearing them talk about stories, that was from like day one. She was the biggest fangirl of his when he was playing, and he would get all sort of spun up and intimate. I'm like, wow, this is amazing, because she'd make this, incredibly complex storytelling jewelry.
Mm. I love that you said that because so many people get hung up on wanting to marry their twin when really it doesn't have to be you have the exact same hobbies or interests. But I always say like the umbrella should be the same. If you're both interested in, something creative and you can support one
Hmm.
another. I met someone last night. She was telling me that her husband is kind of a well-known journalist and she said the reason they connected is she went to journalism school and she had worked in that world for a little bit. And so when they met, like they really connected on that. And that's something that she respected in him. And she knows like how hard of work that is to work in that kind of industry. And that was just like an easy point of connection for them. But I get a lot of clients that are hung up on, like they have to like the same exact things as me and be into the same exact hobbies, which I don't think is necessarily, realistic. You influence one another. When you meet someone, you maybe have never tried skiing before. That's kind of more
Hmm.
extreme one, but you don't like going to winter, vacation spots, but your partner does. And I actually have a friend that he loves to ski. She does not, but she loves going to these beautiful resorts. She's always waiting at the bottom, cheering him on, and they make it work. So yeah, I love that example of having that connection point of something they both love, especially if it's something like a passion.
I think it's good what you're also describing too, is because honestly, that's sort of my thing with my wife and I. She does not ski. I do. She's not much into the resorts, but she will find a winery somewhere regardless,
I
and
like
we'll
that too.
wind up with some new bottles. But it's setting aside the space, I think, and you can start to find it a little bit early in terms of the differences. Marrying your twin or kind of dating your twin, I guess if you want to be a brand, in other words, is like, hey, that's the fitness couple. Hey, that's
Mhm.
the ski couple. That's the, I don't know, art show, bougie sort of couple and stuff like that. Then dating your twin is just fine, because then you'll be on brand. But that brand can be like a cage. And it comes with certain costs and consequences versus I think it's more interesting if you give and start to understand the space that each needs individually.
Mhm.
So if it's this case, let's talk skiing. So if I need to go skiing because it scratches the itch for me, alpine trees, potentially, breaking my leg while I'm going down the hill a million miles an hour, while she actually enjoys sort of the ambiance and then kind of exploring and finding new things. We need to have that space. And affection, I call it sort of emotional square footage. So if you're going to
Yeah.
have this house sort of built up, or an apartment, if you want to start with that way, there's my room, there's her room, there's our rooms, etc., and
Mm.
can still have that space, and it can be respected, it can be added to and contributed to, but it's still distinctly that person's space. And I think that's actually
Mhm.
also something that's necessary to find early while dating, is to understand, okay, the idea is not to displace the rest of everyone's life, or in this case, move into their emotional space versus, ours. It's to figure out, can these be combined, and yet can they still be respected?
Mhm.
And remodeling is encouraged.
Using your emotional economics, how do you describe like when people feel a spark on the first or don't feel a spark on the first date? Is that one of the short-term trades that you were talking about?
Yes, it depends who I'm talking to. Sometimes I just call it emotional day trading. So in other words, as you show up, you buy a stock, and you bought the stock, and all of a sudden stock drops. You went to a nice
Mhm.
restaurant. It's like, oh, this is going to be amazing. Her photo, his photo looks great. They walk in, they have a certain panache about them, etc. But all of a sudden the conversation evolves, and it doesn't go where expected. That's okay. Well, that's a regret trade, etc. But sometimes it's just the opposite. It's like everything you think you want, it's all there. And again, having that time, I think you want to still keep those sparks. And honestly, you still want to date, and you still want to have disappointments even after you find your match, because you also have the rewards. So every couple will have their thing that triggers the other. I know that honestly, like if we go out somewhere and my wife decides to let her hair down because she has long blonde hair, etc., like that, big curls, so she ties it up most of the time. It's like it's a trigger for me, so I know she's doing it for me. So that's like a date for us. So it's a day trade, quote unquote, that she does. She knows that I appreciate and will enjoy. And I'm
Mm.
sure I do other things when I, actually, comb my hair once in a while or something like that. Where she has this thing when I supposedly lift up heavy objects. I'm not exactly sure where that comes from, but it involves something there somewhere, which I know I'm consciously doing it for her as well.
Ooh, so how can we help people not get so caught up on feeling that like instant chemistry spark? Because we both know that that doesn't necessarily last for long-term compatibility or marriage, but people are very caught up on that. Like they want to feel that initial hot and heavy spark. But in reality, we know that it's not sustainable. If you start dating someone, you're already at a 10, you have no place to go but down. Like you can't be the most attracted to your partner on the first date. It should only grow. But people don't seem to kind of think of it that way. They're still looking for that insane spark type feeling. What do you say to that?
I think people need to, instead of think of sparks, is think of it instead of signals. Don't deny
Mm.
chemistry, don't deny passion and sex and lust and all those things like that. But you gotta look for in terms of what signal is really being sent. And one of the first ones really that I think most people aren't as keenly aware of is trust that comes in the non-verbal signals. So vulnerability, how someone is close to you, do they hold their hands? Do they respond to touch? Do they respond to general proximity? When you say something, that you can watch their face respond and see if it sort of lights up. Do they
Mm.
kind of actually show you that they're disappointed or they disagree with you on something? And you should be receptive to that and looking for those signals. And you should also try, if possible, to send some of those signals as well consciously, and then see how they respond. So to think of it rather than just the flush of hormones we all get and the excitement and everything like that, just spend a fraction of the time sending, am I getting the right signals? Am I sending the right signals? And then see if it can actually lead to a second or third date um, that that feels like it's something that can be built upon. And that's one of the
Yep.
first things I usually say to people is give it just a little bit of conscious thought. And by the
Hmm.
way, it also starts with, I think, as well, for some people, is I'm all for, obviously, the title of the book is Why We Can't Stop Caring, but it's, you know, am I caring about what that person is saying? Am I caring about what that person's feeling? Do they care about what I'm saying and sharing kind of their lives with me? Or is this just sort of transactional and fun? By the way, there should be a large number of transactional and fun relationships if you're dating out there, because you have to still figure out like how to practice. And so I'm not discouraging that you need to kind of screen people away, but you'll start to find those signals get more transparent over time.
Well, what I think is actually a bigger indicator early dating is how someone is when you're not together in the first couple weeks of dating.
Mm,
Like, do you hear from them? Are they texting you? Do they call you? Do you always know when you're
okay.
going to see them again? Or is someone taking 24 hours to respond? And when you're saying, "Oh, I'd love to do this again," they're like, "Yeah, for sure," and not really giving anything more committal. Or they say, "Yeah, great, maybe this weekend." They're just not really giving you a lot to work with. I think that's actually the most telling, and that's like the conscious thought in dating is seeing how do you feel when you're not together, because it's really easy to feel good when you're with someone because of
Hmm.
course you're getting their attention. But when you're not together, I think that's a bigger indicator of how they'll treat you in a relationship if they're not giving you much attention or they're really busy or they're not communicating in the style that you like. But we tend to kind of give people a lot of leeway in the beginning or make some excuses for them. But I've always said that is kind of that's never done me wrong. If I notice the way someone communicates early on, it never changes. It's not like they get better all of a sudden because I think you try to
Hmm.
do your best foot forward and early on. So if they're already showing you they're not giving you 100%, I don't think it typically changes. What do you think?
When I was dating, and actually in some ways this affects even my relationship now, is I would try to, I'll call it expectation signals early. So rather than finishing up a date saying, "Hey, do you want to get back together again?" I would try to understand we would bring up a topic about like, how do we, how do I would bring up, how do I work with my friends? Like, how often do I see them? Do we have get togethers, that sort of thing. So I would start to set up like my social expectations. And even doing that today is helpful in terms of, especially after one of the challenges after you're with someone for a while is start having your worlds sort of close in and about trying to set what your sort of outward social expectations are. And I think if you
Mm.
do that, I mean, it's hard to say, okay, if you're just having coffee as a first date, all right, probably tough to do. If you're having dinner or you've got a little bit of time, then it's much easier to do. And I found actually that was one of the things when I met my wife, but I was also dating two other women loosely at the same time. And she was, looking back, was one of the easiest things was to say, okay, well, she gets that I have all these other things that I'm doing. I'm still a father. I'm still involved with going skiing with and bike riding and mountain biking with my buddies. I really like to do some of these other things. And she was kind enough or accepting enough. And now I understand why in terms of like, well, can I join you on kind of like one of these excursions to, go mountain biking? I'll just kind of futz around and then we go some wineries afterwards, which we both love wine, so that turned out really well anyways. But she understood how to sort of include herself in that social circle right away. And that was a great signal for me is because remember the name of the study, there's something that basically says men look for a companion in terms of liked interest, or it's at least adjacent interest. So if I'm not an outdoors person, I'm going to an outdoors woman. If I'm a artsy, whatever, culture, explore the world guy, I'm going to want the same thing. And for
Mhm.
women, it's usually a little bit more in safety, but then partnership is, I think, second or third. I don't remember the exact study. But I think regardless, either way, having some of that communication early helps people say, should I call them back the next day? Should I send them a text? Do they kind of
Mhm.
have, a tight social circle, or are they so busy that I should give them a little bit of respect on their time because they show that they're involved with so much that by sharing with me, they're telling me they are wanting to include me potentially in their life, but at the same time, they're also setting how that would work. So you can't just, I think, playing the game of, um, should I cut text within 24 hours? Should I call that sort of thing? I think that's kind of way old school. Um,
Mhm.
not that I want to get into the subject dating apps at all, but I mean, with the sheer number of messaging back and forth and just the quick, sort of thing, and be able to see someone else messaging, I just think creates more anxiety.
Mhm.
Send some early signals in terms of how you expect to be talked to and how you want to talk back to someone. And that could be kind of one of those things where you're testing early on.
Yeah, I agree. My sister always told me that when you meet someone, give them a month of how they want to naturally behave with you. And if it works for
Exactly.
you, great. And if it doesn't, then move on because you don't want to be constantly telling someone, I need you to do this and I need you to do that, and trying to get them to be someone that they're not. Because some people like to communicate more, others don't. Some people are really busy and have a lot going on, others can give you all the time in the world. So really just find someone who's naturally going to kind of fit what you're looking for than trying to force someone to fit into what you're looking for, right?
I wish I had a sister. Apparently not. I had a bunch of, my only influence socially and growing up was my grandfather and he was an extreme introvert, but an engineer. So he made me highly analytical, but not particularly social. So that early on would have saved me probably a lot of headache.
What are some good indicators that there's compatibility? We talked about like kind of similar interests, but anything else that people can really look for to kind of show that, oh, this is someone that I should be investing in? whether or not, the chemistry is super high, or maybe you're not really feeling it physically, but there's a lot of good things on paper. Like how do people kind of decide where to invest?
Affectionately, I would call them index funds, emotional index funds.
I love that.
For those who don't know what an index fund is, so a composition of funds around, they could be anything you want. In other words, they are what you're things that make you happy. For instance, it could be I love to travel. I love to do when I'm there. I'd like to connect with people. I like to be social on my trips, etc. That sort of thing. So that's like an index fund, and you can have multiple ones, and you can decide to get rid of some if you want. So as you start to move past the first few dates phase, and you start to get into saying, "Oh, this person could work," try to build one. This is something, in other words, it's not just one activity. And that's actually one of the risks too, is I was like, we love to go skiing, since you brought it up before. Well, it turns out really one person loved it more than the other. And so it has high risk. Okay, but how do you make it more than that? Pick kind of a subject area, that sort of thing, or a fund that you're going to put into, which has a balance for both of us. And if you can't find one, that actually would be a really good signal to say, well, it's actually just this really transactional thing. So I'll go to art galleries with her. I'll tolerate that. If she goes to whiskey distilleries with me, because then you're back to just day trading. In other words, it's a short term. If I do this, she'll do it. And if she does that, then I'll do it. And so it's just trading back and forth. You shouldn't get away from that completely, because there's some things which can be really special about having that spark go back and forth. But the question is can you have, these index funds? If you don't like index funds, then go back to the emotional square footage thing. Can we build this apartment? And it has these cool rooms. One is for entertainment, and one is for skiing, and one is for trekking across the world. And maybe we like cruising, so we have the cruise ship room, which has all sorts of weird boat paraphernalia in it and that sort of thing. So if you can build one of those to start with, where it's not just a single activity, I think it's a really great indicator. Say there could be more with this person. My wife and I came from the same industry loosely, but as she put it, I was the bearer of bad news. Like I could make people feel good that the sky was falling, and she could sell ice to Eskimos. We're both technologists, but I mean, we had very different ends of the spectrum and stuff like that. But what we could do is we could have conversations about it. So that was one of the first things we start to say. We could both gripe about the same loosely kind of work we're in. Then we started to build it around, honestly, it started as coffee and then it became wine. Because if you're a coffee fanatic like I am a little bit, then different varietals have different tastes. And so then we got into wines and stuff like that. And so there's this whole thing about international sort of food and cultural experiences. And so we have an index fund on that. And then it just kept going from there. So we found all sorts of different things to build our life around. And things, what we started with is different than where we're at now. And that's great. But we still also have, again, some of those quick little spark things that we know set each other off. And that keeps it lively.
I love how you said index fund. That makes actually so much sense. And what I've really appreciated in my relationship is we do have similar interests, but I have been exposed to things I never thought that I would be exposed to before. Like the band Fish, I never thought that I would be going to so many Fish shows. I'm actually going to see them at the Sphere soon. I never had that on my bingo card. I'll be honest with you. And at first, I was like kind of against it. I was like, it was like very much a day trade. But now, it's now that we're like, traveling for him, a cool experience. I've learned to appreciate that this is something that he really loves and means a lot to him. And I actually feel like honored that he wants to share that with me. And I think that's like a better way to think of it rather than being like, ugh, my partner likes this. And so I have to do, I tell people instead of getting like, I have to, start saying I want to. And that will just like shift your mindset on anything that you participate in. I literally did that for myself. And I realized like, oh, I have a better attitude when I'm telling myself like, I want to spend time with my husband. Not like, oh, I should go to the show because he wants me to. And that was like a big game changer for me. Cause I think everything kind of boils down to mentality.
Yeah, I think it does. I think you've also brought up an interesting aspect is when that person invites you in, you have an opportunity to make whatever that thing is your own a little bit as well. So if you go to Fish and you decide music's kind of like whatever, okay, but the stage performance and the energy vibe is like awesome, right? And so what you really found is you want to go to these concerts where the whole energy vibe stage performance concept is off the charts. So then you start shopping to go to these events based on what you like and what he likes as well. And so I think there's so much that, again, when you invite someone in and they respond and you see them start to engage, but also help the other person make it their own. And that'll be actually, you talk about dating in terms of great signal. So Someone's going out. My buddy he was sort of managing a band, and I don't remember what the band's name was, but the acronym for the band was LSD, which should probably tell you something about the band in the first place. So I was dating this one woman, and we went to this, and she was kind of resistant, and I was like, "Hey, my buddy, we're going to be able to get in, and we could stay for an hour, we could stay for 20 minutes, we could stay all night. Doesn't really matter." And it was me probably inviting her at the time, and I was thinking about this as how to say, okay, this Rob, this guy, the two of us were a pair, Rob and Bob, and I was inviting her in, and was she willing to kind of make it her own? Instead, and this didn't, obviously not my wife, but she made such a stinking stuff like that when I go. I think we stayed all of like 10 minutes. We didn't even barely make it through the second song. We went out a couple more times, but and that might be a really early indicator for people dating. Say, okay, if you're inviting someone to make it their own, you encourage them to say, we can make this whatever you want. I just want to be present for my friend, and see how they respond.
Mm.
And this person might not be for you. I never asked Rob, like, what'd you think of her? It was more of like, just, I've invited her in. Can she make it her own? Or maybe if she's just honest enough to just say, I don't ever want to do that again because it's just not me. And that would be fine too as well. But at least it shows that she at least made an effort. And the same thing goes for men. I mean, men suffer from the same thing as well in terms of being invited in. They need to make an effort as well. So I'm going to see if there's something I can find completely, engaging about this, or is it really just like pulling teeth for me? And I'm willing to say that, because it's honesty is a problem on both sides of the fence. It's definitely not gender specific at all. And that's why I found even when interviewing people with the book, it was like most problems that are like how I feel, how I care, what I love. It's not isolated to one gender at all.
Yeah, at my wedding, one of my good guy friends, he brought his girlfriend, and I noticed they kind of left early-ish. And I saw him maybe, I don't know, 2 months or so after my wedding, and they were broken up. And he said part of the catalyst was at the wedding. The whole time, she was like, I don't want to go. I want to go. I don't want to be here. And, kind of forced him to leave his good friend's wedding early. Like he didn't want to leave. And she was just being such a pain that he was like, fine, like, let's go. And he just kind of realized then, like, I brought you to something. And it was a wedding. It was fun. Like there was food and drinks and dancing. Like what else could you ask for? And just the attitude, he was very turned off by that.
Actually, should be a good test. I think the wedding test should be good for all relationships. I think people have a natural aversion or endearment to weddings. So I think part of between that and probably the alcohol, probably their true selves come out.
Yeah, I've definitely gone to weddings with people and never saw them again after. And something that I did bad, but like I've been a date someone's wedding of a guy's friend, and I was like, "Did you just need me as a date? Like I thought we were dating now." So I think it's good to be communicate what your intentions are with that, because a wedding feels like serious when you're invited to to be a wedding
That
guest.
should have told me something. My first wife, before we got married, I went to one of her friend's weddings, and she was in the bridal party, and I was at the reject table with the family's token alcoholic. I won't mention the names, and it's an incriminating thing. It probably should have told me something that the marriage wasn't going to work. I mean, we did well. We had kids together the first marriage. We were both fully responsible and at fault for it not working out. And again, it really just sort of like we didn't have an idea what a healthy relationship was. And we fell into what I was talking about, sort of this aspect of day trading. If I do this, then she does that, and she does this, and I do that. And that was sustainable only for so long before it just, you realize that you've got very little to stand on. So when things get really tough, that's why the important aspect of, I think, finding, for different people, sometimes it's after their second or third date, sometimes it's after their second or third month, is do you have something potentially to stand on in your relationship? Because things will get rough, and you got to figure out, okay, how are we going to endure this? What can we go back to? What do we share some commonality on, and stuff like that? It doesn't have to be, to your point, identical, but at least it has to be common enough that we can both stand on a little bit and escape our whatever we designed and become that dating fun couple all over again.
Exactly. I have a question for you. I wonder what you'll say about this. So, a lot of women that I work with, especially if they're getting later 30s, early 40s, they can come across a little intense on dates. That's what the guys tell me.
Okay.
Because they're looking, like, okay, I need to get married soon. I need to have a child. And the men sometimes feel like they're just a stand-in, like I can be anybody. They're just looking for a husband and a sperm donor. I could be anybody. And I get, but these women, like they have questions they need to ask. They want to make sure there's compatibility there. How can they do it in a way that feels less intense, more playful, fun? But like you need to get, certain questions answered. So you don't have time to waste.
No, I understand. And I dated older women. So my wife's actually older than I am by a good bit. So I get it in terms of some of the pressure. I think there's two ways to look at it. So I think for women is, I think a lot of times with all these social pressures, I want to question is as to why you're feeling these pressures. So if we go back to sort of like the economics aspects of things, what are you feeling scarce about? Is it time?
Mhm.
Is it a sense of place in career? So you need to make a shift or something like that sooner than later. So I think it's, for them, it's a question is what are you feeling pressure and scarcity about? And why is it that? Because that will then determine if you're going to ask some of these pointed questions and poke at them, how can you come across authentically without being intense? I think is what you're basically
Mhm.
saying. So once you have a sense of assurance as to why you're asking, I think it'd be much easier to ask. In terms of, on the flip side, in terms of receiving, one is I think men need to sort of step up from a maturity perspective, understand that sort of time is fleeting for everyone in general. And so having some sort of sense of urgency is important, especially when exploring beyond just the spark. There's attraction. Do you look good? Do I look good? Neither one of us catfished each other, that sort of thing. So they need to get tougher on that side of it as well. But I think in terms of warming up to it, I think it's to start sort of one topic at a time. And that's one of the things is I had two specific women I dated who I felt like I was being chopped. It's like, will you do this? Will you do that? Will you do this? Will you do that? And that sort of thing. And I'm like, this is a lot for the second date. I mean, I have a life and stuff like that. So I get these things. And so I understand a little bit of aspect, but I think start with one at a time. So if you're really interested in exploring a family, rather than asking right out, will you have kids? Can I meet your family? You meet my family.
Mhm.
So that's what. So you start to introduce the family dynamic. I mean, obviously, both of you are the progeny of something. So introducing you to a family and stuff like that, when we're now in terms of having some of those social conversations, or just ask how close are you to your family. And if you ask me, during while I was dating before my first marriage, in terms like that, I am not very close to my family at all. You probably think I was the last person who would ever have kids. And honestly, probably at the time, I would have fit into that mold and would have said, hell no. But then people can change over time once they understand what family means. And so by getting
Mhm.
some exposure to that, if you're worried about career, talk about more in the abstract in terms of what people, what will make you happy. How do you, don't ask the interview question of where you're going to see yourself in 5 to 10 years. But try to explore in terms of what the person's work ethic is. If it's a woman asking a man, it's like, oh, so what makes you happy when you work? What does success feel like? Do you feel like it's the work itself? Do you feel like it's money and reward and stuff like that? So get into some of the sort of the goals a little bit, rather than asking if they're a financial safety net directly. Are you going to be able
Mhm.
to, pay for this, that, and the other thing? Explore what their values are, because their values will guide to where they're going to go. I mean, we all individually, again, sort of back to sort of the emotional economics, is we've all built up capital in our lives. So
Mhm.
I'm assessing your capital, you're assessing mine. So just like if you're going to do sort of a portfolio analysis, okay, have they built enough, sort of, again, the emotional square footage aspects and equity of staying in a place or feeling connected to a place? Have they built up index funds of things that they're passionate about? Do they feel like they have the trust at work and they have trust in the relationships elsewhere, that they feel like they're self-secure and well paid? And the same thing for oneself as well. On the woman's side is to say, okay, do I have these things as well? So once I know my capital and I can
Mhm.
then explore their capital, are we going to have a good portfolio? But if you try
I
to
love
like smash it all together at once, you know, it's
Mhm.
not going to work. So there's the day traders, but then there's also, most of us have this sort of mental character I call the fiduciary. The fiduciary, if you don't know what it is someone usually pay for financial investment. They're like a consultant, but
Mhm.
you share best interest. It's not that they're selling you anything. You're actually paying them as like a Thai consultant. And part of your brain is always looking for the long term, saying, okay, do we have a shared common interest here? And that person's always usually like setting up a list for you. And then the day trader is trying to figure out how to execute it. But they're doing it in very short time versus this one thinking longer. So, respect your fiduciary as woman, but understand how to day trade strategically with it.
Mhm. No, that makes a ton of sense because I I think there's some early indicators that we look for in dating
Hmm.
of how successful someone is, but they could be very misleading. Like just because someone wears a flashy watch doesn't mean they're not in debt. Or if they have a really nice apartment, doesn't mean that they're the ones paying for it. It could be from
That's true.
family. You don't really actually know someone's situation. So I tell people don't make rash judgments very quickly because some of my absolutely wealthiest clients are wearing just like t-shirts and nothing you would ever expect someone with a lot of money to wear. Like they're just not flashy people.
Yep.
And so and I could see a lot of women being like, oh, this guy's just in his white t-shirt thinking of this guy doesn't have any money. But there could be actually passing about someone who's very financially responsible. And that's the
Hmm.
other thing. You want someone that's responsible, not someone who is making a lot of bad day trades. But this is actually the fun,
Right.
and is kind of stuck in the zero sum game where they're spending everything that they have. And I think it's better just to kind of see how someone lives. And I love what you said, meeting family, meeting friends, because the family and friends will always be honest. They will tell you all the details that the
Hmm.
person you're dating probably doesn't want you to know. And just, asking them like some funny stories about the person, or asking if you guys traveled together, what are some trips that you've taken? I feel like that tells you a lot about how
Hmm.
someone lives and what they enjoy doing. But yeah, I like the idea of meeting the inner circle early on. I think it's crazy when people are dating for months and months and months and haven't met friends or any family. I think that's a huge red flag.
Yeah, yeah, I think it is too as well. I think also aspect, as you touched on a bit, is do you when you talk about whether someone's successful or not, try to tease out what their future portfolio is. In other words, is what successful looks like for them is like, do you see yourself retiring at some point? Do you see yourself living in a different city in 5 to 10 years? Like, because this is your temporary state, this is where your job has pulled you, but maybe you want something different. I mean, if you asked me 15 years ago, would we wind up owning a small farm? And I live in an island north of Seattle, et cetera. I can see Canada from my window on a clear day. It's like 12 miles, but yeah, I could still see Canada.
Cool.
I would have said probably not. We're thinking, okay, downtown, New York was an option, Seattle was an option. Honestly, Edinburgh turned out to be an odd option, London. So these were all potential candidates. But as we started to kind of like, I remember early on, it's like, well, what does good look like? Good looks like, when we can travel a lot together at some point. We don't have to be financially rich. We don't want to work. We want to have an act two. That was actually probably the best way to summarize it. We want to have
Mm.
an act two. And that was a future state that we could both agree on. And that's not for everyone. But at some point, the current, whatever you're in right now, dating, lifestyle, I mean, unless it's, I guess, really old money, which I guess is possible and so like that, then you're probably, what you're doing now is going to be different than what you're going to do in 5 to 20 years, depending on where you're at in your kind of
Okay.
dating
And
cycle.
you figure that stuff out together too. I think people get too caught up sometimes on where someone is today.
Hmm.
And if someone's still early on in their career, you have to see potential where they will be eventually, rather than being very focused on, oh, they're kind of lower level at their career, or they're
Yep.
working like crazy hours. Now it might not always be that way. And there's been so many studies that show that men, once they're married, tend to earn more money. There's that level of like, oh, I have responsibilities now. And it's, even though we're in a very modern world, there's still that like level of men need to be providers. I think that women feel, and that men might feel the pressures of as well. Even though
Hmm.
women are out earning men, they're graduating from college more than men. I still talk to so many women that they want to meet someone who earns as much as them or more, which is literally 0.0001% of the
Yeah, it's very
population.
tight.
It's very tight. So, like you said, like you want to merge the portfolio and build something together. And what can you guys afford together? Because God forbid anything can happen. There could be disease, illness, someone could lose their job. I mean, anything can happen, and
Hmm.
you have to work together as a team. And that was something that really struck me when I was dating, because when I started my company, there was no money. I didn't know if I was going to be able to pay rent. I didn't know how long I could, keep this going. I had a severance from my advertising job when I got laid off, but I was only for 3 months. And so
Yeah.
I was definitely very, nervous and dating out of that fear, scarcity, financial insecurity. And so the partners I was seeking out, and I don't think I was even doing this consciously, I think it was very subconscious. I was really looking for, financially well off partners.
Hmm.
But what I realized, these men were spending all their money. Just because they're making a lot of money doesn't mean they were saving a lot of money. And I
Yeah.
learned that lesson a few times. And I realized, okay, I don't necessarily need someone who earns a certain amount or, at a certain level. I really wanted to be with someone who has the same kind of hustler mentality, that entrepreneurial spirit where we can build something together. We can
Yep.
support each other's businesses. And there's a lot of respect there. And maybe together we could start our own business or do our own, invest in real estate together or something like that. I realized
Hmm.
that that was something that I actually really wanted more. And when I met my husband, that's exactly what we have. But when I met him, I was thinking, oh, like he doesn't have a 9 to 5. He doesn't have stability. He's also an entrepreneur. All the things that I wanted, I was starting to question. And I was like, my scarcity, my financial, fear is coming back and, crept its way back in. When him and I actually like sat down and talked about it, I realized, oh wow, like what we could build together is exactly what I've always said I'm looking for. And when it actually, hit me in my face, I was like, I got a little nervous. But I do think that if you really know what you're looking for and know it's going to work for you, you can find someone that matches. And if, rather than coming from like a place of fear or like we talked about, but being more aligned with what's actually going to work with you. And especially on the female side, do you really need a provider or do you want a partner?
I think it's a great point. I think there's a way to think about it. If people are still sort of stuck on security and safety, try switching from, again, we go back to what economics really means. If you study of it, it's scarcity against resources and value. It's not money, unless you say, okay, money is my only resource and it's the only thing I value, et cetera thing. If you can start to say, great, I want a relationship that's about values. So, I mean, honestly, after my first divorce, I was broke, not broke and stuff like that, because it just, it wasn't War of the Roses. It was not pleasant. Let's just leave it at that. So I didn't come with much money, and she was actually already making more money than I was, which is funny that I actually have a neighbor down the street, and there's kind of the same thing as where she was kind of like the breadwinner. But it's really about saying, okay, if you can come together with someone and start to say, okay, this is what we value. Can we create something that we value together? And then the money doesn't always take care of itself, but it will usually take care of itself. I mean, if people are motivated, they're complementary to each other, they're encouraging to one another. You can use the person as sometimes your best friend. Everyone says straw man, by the way. I think what they basically is the steel man or the stone man, and that can be the woman or the man. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, there's just someone who will push back on you hard and won't fall over no matter what. And if you can find that person to bounce your values off of and be a complement, then you can eliminate a lot of those fears about the more tangible apartment, car, paycheck, and that sort of thing. And I think to your point,
Mhm.
it's becoming much more flat, and especially in certain areas. I think there's places where women are the vast majority. Being in healthcare, it seemed that women. I know at least when I was working at CVS and Aetna, I think the population was like 65, 70% women versus men. And that's not, so take out the executive level. And that's, I know there's big discussions about executives in terms of women and men being in the executive pool. But if you take the other 99%, women are equally as powerful, equally as capable, and are doing a lot to bring value to relationships, both monetarily and otherwise. And so that really is, I think, more on equal footing than it's ever been before. And guys need to suck it up as well and just accept that and recognize it. Like, if your value system is the other way, that's fine. Maybe your value system is a woman should stay home, but that's her value system too. Maybe
Mhm.
maybe that's okay. But on principle, I think, we're all on a level playing field. We're all trying to do something where we find connected to someone else. We're trying to find that symbiotic value to evolve and become our next best selves with someone, as well as keep, a good portion of ourselves individually. I mean, that's
Mhm.
really what we're trying to get towards.
I totally agree. We'll end it with a listener question. Is it wrong to want someone who reminds you of an ex? And I thought a little bit about this. I guess it really depends if the values that your ex had and the connection that you had was really strong. And so you want, something similar. I think that's okay. But I also think you have to recognize that everyone is different and every relationship you have will have different dynamics. Everyone, you can't replicate something exactly like you had with someone else, but you can take the good from past relationships and use that as your kind of North Star of finding someone else that's a better fit for you. What did you think when you heard that question?
I would agree. I think if you were able to build a relationship with someone before and that part worked, sure, they can be exactly like your ex. One of my more memorable exes was a lot of fun and completely random at times. That's my current wife. Very random at times. Not all the time, but every time, every once in a while, it's just like, sure, let's whatever, let's go do that, or let's talk about that, or whether that sort of thing. And that's something I didn't recognize. This was before even my first marriage. I didn't recognize that because of being brought up with this dysfunctional weirdness in my house and my engineer grandfather. I'm a planner. Admit it, I'm a planner. So I needed someone to say, get out of your head. And this is what we're going to do to get out of your head. We're going to go, let's go whale watching today. Or let's try to cook this food that we've never done before and it might burn the kitchen down, but we'll try it anyways and see how it goes. So whatever. So I missed that. And I didn't know I missed it, but I did know I wanted someone with a lot of energy. But that randomness really was kind of something that I figured out, I think, year 2 of being married, and was like, wow, this is like amazing. And this is, yes, just like one of my exes.
I love that. Yeah, I do think, like you said, like we talked about earlier, marrying your twin sometimes isn't the best. Like you need someone who complements you in areas that you need help in and vice versa. So it's kind of nice when someone has opposite traits of you where, you can, like if you're someone's more type A, you need someone that can be like, all right, you need to stop with all these spreadsheets or whatever. Like we're going to go do something fun. Otherwise, two people that are exactly the same, I think they would drive each other crazy.
I would think so. It goes back to that sort of brand. If you want to become a brand when you grow up or when you get old, that's fine. If that's satisfying to you. But I can't imagine a more confining cage personally. I want someone to call me out in all sorts of different ways.
Oh, literally, the only person I allow to speak to me a certain way is my husband, and even then, he's on thin ice. But my goal for 2026 was to listen to my husband more because on it, I hate to admit it, but he's usually spot on. Whenever I have a new client, I tell him about him, and he's like, "Oh, that person's going to be difficult." He's never wrong. Or if I, want to engage with somebody that is, being a little flaky, he'll say, "Oh, that person's not like." He just knows exactly what's going to work and what's not. So this is my year listening to my husband.
And again, I think that's great. And you have someone who's a wonderful partner on that. We all have our prior experiences and they make us who we are. And there's some great things. And sure, husband, the analyzer, personal critique, whatever, lie detector, whatever you want to call him. I get that. I have some, especially having I have a stepdaughter. So yes, became very much analytical in terms of the boys she date. But yeah, we bring special things and we should definitely try to listen where we can, even if it feels wildly uncomfortable, because that's a way of them sharing trust with us.
Yeah, so that's how they share their love for you, really, because they want the best for you. Like, no one wants me to succeed more than him, right? But tell everyone where they can find you if they want more information about you or get your book.
So check out can'tstopcaring.com. I actually trained an AI on the book, like all of its research. So you can ask it 10 questions. I just did 10 questions in case bots ever find the site. But ask it all about the book. You can also find a way to get in touch with me, set up some time. Otherwise, you can kind of find me on LinkedIn, but I'm not huge into social media quite yet with the book. So that the best place really is the book's website. Books for sale on Amazon, and a couple of bookstores have picked it up, but I couldn't tell you where because Ingram doesn't tell me.
Okay, well, perfect. I will link all of that into the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on. It was so nice to chat with you.
Same. It was a good time. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.